That's what I want to find out, the guy's name.
I'm telling you, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know who's on third.
Now, Abbott, you want to be the manager of the baseball team?
Yes.
You know the guy's names?
Well, I should.
Well, you tell me the guy's names on the baseball team.
I say, who's on
You know the guy's names on the baseball team?
Yes.
Well, go ahead. Who's on first?
Yes.
I mean the guy's name.
Who?
The guy playing first.
Who?
The guy playing first base.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, Bruchim Abbaim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You have found Beit Virtuali. Let's stir up a little Torah, and let's start with who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third, those from a certain generation, or those of us slightly younger with older brothers obsessed with radio shows of that generation, know that the confusing name of the human being playing first base was who. From the perspective of American English clarity in conversation, it's a poor name. From the perspective of comedy, it's gold. And wouldn't it have been a special gem had this infamous first baseman from Bud Abbott and Costello's routine become, let's say, president? Who signed the bill? Of course he did, and he even used 36 pens. Okay, I think we can do even better than that. Let's try. Who was involved in the scandal? Yes, just like the last one and the one before that. You gonna be press secretary? Yes. And you don't know the name of the one involved in the scandal? Well, I should. Then who was involved in the scandal? Yes, and this time there was video. For Abbott and Costello, and for all of the vaudeville forefathers that originally came up with this type of skit, this is purely hilarious. When the narrative voice of God in the Torah and the greatest of all prophets in Jewish tradition play the same game, it can also be hilarious from a certain perspective. Mostly, however, it is painful. Painful because it reflects what happens when we become so locked into believing that our finite understanding of something covers all possibilities, that we block out any other information outside of what we already know. Okay, it's going to take a little bit of time to get there, so stick with me. In the beginning of Parashat Vaera, we have a Moses back in Egypt having unenthusiastically accepted the job of demanding that Pharaoh let my people go. And to be fair to Moses' hesitation, so far it hasn't exactly gone well. After a demand at the end of our previous parasha to let the Hebrew people leave into the wilderness for 3 days to celebrate a festival and make sacrifices, Pharaoh clearly considers the merits of Moses' and Aaron's demands and responds by making the jobs assigned to the Hebrew people essentially impossible and exponentially increasing the burden of an already onerous existence. No straw for the bricks that you are making, so go scrounge around the field for tiny pieces, and if you miss your quota, you will get smote, smitten, whatever. So yes, it's a setup, and a cruel one at that. Rule 1, don't make demands of Pharaoh. Rule 1, corollary, don't make demands on someone who thinks they're God. Rule 2, same as rule 1. So Moses returns. Torah doesn't actually say where he returns to, which is a discussion for a different day, to speak with the Eternal and engage in some mixture of complaining and renegotiation after a truly unpleasant encounter with Hebrew work foreman. Said foreman had just been chastised by Pharaoh, or at least Pharaoh's courtiers, and told that, yes, their charges, the Hebrew slaves, had to do work which would now be impossible work without the correct raw materials. As Moses and Aaron were those who had kicked off this new level of hardship with the whole let my people go thing, well, the foremen let them know exactly what they thought of this new political initiative. The overseers greet them with the kind words, "May the Eternal look upon you and punish you for making us loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers." You can tell they had a great time putting a sword in their hand to slay us. So Moses and Aaron return and demand answers, and the Eternal essentially answers with, just wait. It's all a setup on my side, actually, so that this is all more dramatic, so that Hollywood movies and cartoons in the future will have awesome material for their SFX teams. And then a new theological speech begins at the beginning of our Parashat Vaera, that sounds eerily familiar. I am the Eternal. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my ineffable four-letter name, the Eternal. And then once again, the name is trotted out as Moses is once again instructed to speak with his kinfolk. Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am the Eternal. Okay, nice comfort, I guess, for people literally slaving away. The Eternal is going to get you out of Egypt. Who? Exactly. And if you're following along with all of this by looking at the Hebrew, it gets even more confusing. Following the convention of Moses Mendelssohn, every time I translate a passage in the Tanakh, where the name of God presented is the ineffable four-letter name, made of the letters Yud, He, Vav, and He, rather than the Jewishly forbidden attempt to pronounce these letters, or the more normative use of Adonai or Hashem, as a replacement, I choose to use the Eternal, in German, Der Ewige. In Hebrew, well, Yud, He, Vav, and He. Oy vey. The eerily familiar refrain sounds familiar because we have already played this name game. Last week in Parashat Shemot, Moses asks, "Who shall I tell the Hebrew people is sending me?" Seriously, you can't make this up. And it does at least a little cause an eyebrow to raise when you find out that Bud Abbott's mother, Ray Fisher, was Jewish, making him halakhically Jewish, so maybe something unconscious from the Torah helped form this comedy gem. It is axiomatic, however, that if you have to explain a joke, that joke is no longer funny. But if we're engaging in theology, then we always get to explain. And if that's funny, so be it. Just like it is hilarious that deity in the book of Genesis preferred the Plymouth to the Chevrolet, because Adam and Eve were driven out of the Garden of Eden in God's fury? Yes, I know. Okay, anyway, by way of turning everything into an explanation and therefore non-funny, the answer to Moses' question last week was, tell them that Yeh Asher Yeh sent you. Careful, because this answer is akin to what is on second, or I don't know is on third. Acknowledging that there are homonyms in other languages that sound like who, no one in their right mind in English, most likely even the greatest Abbott and Costello fans of all time, would name their child Who, W-H-O. Even with question-worthy names out there that shall not be mentioned of celebrities, for example, there are some places that we are just not going to go even in our silliest moments, like Who. This is because even though types of fruit given as an appellation will cause the poor child to be mercilessly mocked, at the end of the day, banana or orange dough represent a series of sounds that after a little practice can be associated with that angry-looking child rightfully representing their famous and idiotic parents. Was that too honest? Yes, I am judging. The function of who, W-H-O, along with what, when, where, how, and why, will never, however, become a series of sounds that can be overcome when shouted across a playing field. Who has the ball will always be cognitively processed as who has the ball, which might seem trivial until this is now uttered in a court of law. Who broke into your store? Exactly! That's what I wrote on the complaint and have been trying to get that across correctly to the press for months. No one listens. We get the joke quickly. The straight man cannot, lest the routine end before the next Ovaltine ad spot. In the Torah, it is so effective, however, that Moses never gets the joke. And the Eternal keeps returning to the routine because what is hilarious in this type of sketch is deadly serious in its utterance in the Torah. The narrative voice of the Eternal is trying to communicate something to Moses, and Moses doesn't get it. So the Eternal leans in. Moses still doesn't get it. And neither do we. Yeh Asher Yeh is who. It's not a name. There is no he here. There's also no she, and there's also no they. Usually translated as some variation of I am that I am. For you language nerds, Asher functions as a determiner, a demonstrative pronoun, or a relative pronoun. And that, or that which, is a good enough translation for our purposes. Yeh is first person imperfect for to be. But in biblical Hebrew, past, present, and future grammatic voices get a bit of flexibility, so we can translate Yeh on either side of the Asher as am, was, or will be. Hey, mix and match. I will be that which I was. I was that which I am, or will be. I am who. Exactly. Something powerful is happening because we force the who is on first base, to be a proper name the way that we understand names in our everyday. We are Bud Abbott. We don't get the joke. In the first round of the Moses versus God routine, Moses asks the question for very specific reasons that are critical to understanding the story. Deities in both the Egyptian and Canaanite pantheons, the pantheons familiar to the peoples that would eventually become the Jews, had names that indicated their dominion. Especially clear in the Canaanite pantheon, a god of the sky would literally be called the god of the sky. Baal Shemaim. If the dominion, the place of control, the place of the kingdom of that god was a specific earthly place, the name would include this information. Baalat Gabol was the goddess of Byblos, what Gabol in Phoenician means. And Baal Zaphon was the god of Mount Zaphon, known today as Jebel Akra on the Syrian-Turkish border. To ask a god or a goddess their name was the incredibly practical way to not only understand their power, but how to honor and not honor them. You would not make a sacrifice to Baal Zaphon while further south in a modern-day Jebel, or ancient Byblos, because that was not the domain of Baal Zaphon. That wasn't their kingdom. That would qualify as an ancient duh. Moses asks, "Who shall I say is sending me?" Because everything he knows, and everything, quite frankly, that his kinfolk know, is that gods and goddesses have dominion or specific aspects of what is known, places and things. The Moses who first hears this, the Moses at the burning bush, is not a leader of the Hebrew people. He's a runaway. He's left. He's abandoned. He's a shepherd of Midianite priest, and he has a wicked temper. It is absurd on the face of it that he should be charged with uttering to the single most powerful person on the face of this planet, "Let my people go." Seriously, don't let this slide. We cannot understand Torah unless we let it live as something real across time. This is like me, an American-born rabbi living in a tiny village in Germany, hearing or connecting with something that I translate in my finite cognition as a voice from heaven that tells me to walk to Moscow and offer helpful advice to Vladimir Putin. When we stop rolling our eyes with the absurdity, we can then start getting an idea as to why Moses kept on finding excuses to say, no thanks. Well, if I had been Moses and I heard a literal voice from heaven telling me what I needed to do and everything would be fine, of course I would do it. No, you wouldn't. None of us would. If I or we were to get an audience with Mr. Putin, what happens to me after I make my righteous demands to let my people go? I hear Lubyanka prison is really nice this time of year. And remember, Pharaoh, as someone who considered himself, and everyone else also considered him as well, a god, had less legal constraints than the current president of the Russian Federation. So what Moses wants to hear, what he's looking for when he asks the question, "Who shall I say is sending me?" was probably something like Baal ha-kicking butt and taking names. Please, oh voice that is coming from a bush that is burning and not being consumed. Please, please, please tell me that you are not Baal ha-marshmallow unicorns. I already have enough to overcome to be accepted as a leader, and I need backup when I am in the throne room. Please be a cool, mighty, and scary god with a name that will give me and my kin courage. You shall say, Iye Asher Iye sent you. The paradigm shift for religions in that region. A radical idea with an unspeakable potential for spiritual transformation and elevation of humanity passed through Moses' consciousness. Who isn't a name? Is there something I'm missing here? Pause. Thought. Consideration. Breathe. Shoulder shrug. Cool, who? Nice to meet you. Or, in our case, cool, Iye Asher Iye. Nice to meet you. Can't wait to introduce you to my folks. And here's where it's sad that the Eternal is not a human, nor has any human attributes, nor anything that could be compared to human attributes, because a head slap would have been warranted, accepting the fact that we collectively would have done and continue to do the exact same thing when we hear the name Iye Asher Iye, because of language, because of names like Who and the Eternal. The communication to Moses in that moment, as it floated through the receptors of wordless inspiration, was something more like, Moses, Moses. Maybe even Moshe, stop thinking of me as a bigger, scarier version of a person. I am all of existence. I am the I of the universe and the identity of all that exists. Every process from abiogenesis to biological evolution to love, to supernovas, to entropy. Stop thinking of me as a name or needing me to have one, because I simply am. The purpose of this dialogue, from Moses' standpoint, was terrifying. Moses was to go to his kinfolk and then Pharaoh and say, okay, y'all, take a deep breath and stick with me for a second. I don't have an idol to point to with a scary cat or dog face or a pointy spear whose dominion is kicking butt and taking names. What I understand from the deep meditation I had in the middle of the wilderness, where I got a great hit of DMT off a burning acacia bush, is that our narrative is part of the very nature of the universe and the forward-moving existence of our people is that we're going to be let go. Apparently, I'm going to go to Pharaoh and say that existence demands that we go, and existence is going to be what I say it is because that is my understanding of existence through my meditation. The multitudes of Hebrew people look uncomfortably at each other, shifting their feet on the stone streets before someone tweets out WTF. So, of course, what happened instead was, okay, folks, there is this mighty God that appeared to me, has great mad skills, and is going to do some magic-y, miracle-y stuff to scare the Behoras out of Pharaoh. Start packing. Enter this week's Parsha, and we have the spiritual awakening that Moses experienced, but repressed, still pushing from that locked-away compartment in his consciousness. Moses, seriously, listen up, dude, I get it. Your ancestors saw me as a local deity that protected their tents. That makes complete sense since the world of your ancestors existed at first around the life of a tent. But we have had some time to let that grow, and in order to move forward as a species, we need to stop playing my God is bigger than your God and start accepting we are all part of the same oneness. I know this is hard to accept as this is a seismic shift from how you currently understand deity. So to help out as a placeholder for universal oneness, use a variation of the verb to be when you refer to the oneness. Yud, He, Vav, He. It will be a reminder that the I of the universe should never be thought of like we think of a person. We are supposed to elevate ourselves by taking responsibility for our interconnectivity. The shorthand in the Torah is, your ancestors knew me as El Shaddai, but you shall know me as Yud He Vav He. Slightly expanded translation, your ancestors knew me as the nurturing and protective God of their tents. I am not a God in that sense. I am all of existence, all that is known and unknown, including the parts of you, Moses, that connect to the universal oneness and mystery. Also connected to Pharaoh, and connected to all the horrible stuff that's going to happen to the Hebrew people across history, including also all the gifts that will enter the world via the unique expression of oneness that we are going to one day call Judaism. Say to your people that I am the eternal. Say to your people that this is simply what is, was, and shall be. But still, who's on first? Because we remain humans. We remain Bud Abbott. The four-letter ineffable name in Torah is supposed to be the pointer to the purpose of existence, doing the spiritual and practical work of finding ways to draw nearer to each other, to heal. How it actually functions in our everyday is as the name on a banner for our team, and then we wave it when we see another team waving another flag with the misunderstood name of their deity on it. That's why so many people do hate religion, is because that is how we have used divine names across the entire world, across every group that has ever existed. And yes, even today, those who accept no deity have replaced deity with their ideology, and they put that misunderstood on a flag as well and demand that we die by it. The question that arises from this is one that requires a little quiet contemplation. Best a place with no electronic devices and with a view of a part of the universe that draws a gasp and reminds us that we ourselves are not the center of the universe. Oceans and mountains are nice. Art and a beautiful tree can work as well. A nice garden, if we are willing to dwell, breathe, and pay attention to the bush burning, yet not being consumed. That means that which is in front of us without our ego getting all in the way. When I pray, when I read sacred names in my sacred book, what do I imagine the deity behind that name to be? Or perhaps it's on the other side that we need to look at it. When I refuse to pray, when I laugh at people who read a sacred book, what do I imagine they are praying to? The more definite and specific the answer, the more we believe who is actually a person. Any feature, any picture, any clear and tangible attribute functions no more than to limit all of existence to the size of our limited imagination and finite personal experience. A God of love, for example, becomes a picture of how we understand love. And if we understand love as, I'm always right, you must obey me, and I have expectations of you that I would never allow you to have of me, then a small God it is indeed that we have created under the banner of love. We read this reminder each year that our ancestors looked to something tangible, but the eye of the universe can only be intangible, because as humans, we will always be looking for who on first. We exist in a tangible world that can only be healed by recognizing that the truer truth of God is that we're all in this together. Anything else, anything that limits, anything that sets me against you and you against me, it's not God. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next time.
בחצות וקול שופר הריעו לפני המלך אדוני